Hello and welcome again to 10 Things About Writing. Last time I was talking about point of view and how it feeds into voice. Today I'm going to talk about tenses, particularly narrative tenses, and how they feed into those two things, voice and point of view, to create your shifting perspective as a storyteller, as a narrator of your story. Traditionally, stories were always told in the past tense, sometimes quite a distant past tense, and because I was a languages teacher for years, I'm going to go through the tenses even though you probably know them, because it's interesting to see how they fit together. And if you take my analogy of camera angles and positions and close cameras and distant cameras, you'll see that point of view and tense marry together to create a kind of subtle, shifting sense of perspective that you can use to your advantage. Now, generally speaking, most authors still use a past tense. The normal narrative past tense is the perfect tense. The descriptive tense, the one that goes, "It was raining," or "When I was small, I used to do this," is generally for description. And we use it a lot in connection with the perfect tense, the narrative tense, the past tense of our storytelling. There's also the pluperfect tense, which is the distant past tense, the one where we are talking about what had already happened before the story started. That's not generally used as a narrative tense because it's very, very distant indeed. It's a very distant camera angle, and it can make your readers feel disconnected if you use it a lot. However, it's useful when you want to set something in time, because time has a number of layers when you're narrating a story, and sometimes it's quite nice to say, "This had happened," in the pluperfect, "when this was happening," in the imperfect, "when this happened," boom, in the perfect, your narrative past tense. That might sound a lot, so I'm going to give you an example, a rather clever one in fact, which I've just found in this proof that I've been reading. This proof by Catriona Ward, The Last House on Needless Street, and I've found a rather nice little passage which actually uses them all, and so you can see what I mean. It also uses the present tense as a narrative tense, which has become fashionable in the last 100 years or so. And the reason some people use the present tense is that it's an extreme close-up. It's like using the first-person close point of view. Not only does it take your story out of the past altogether, it makes it immediate. It makes it something that's happening to you right now. Sometimes it's a bit much. Sometimes it can be annoying to readers because they're not used to that kind of narrative, and it has to be handled delicately. Now, I think that in this passage, it is handled very delicately, and you'll see what I mean. Dee sees the most important thing last, as if her mind cannot absorb a success after so many years of trudging failure. The sign on the corner is in plain view and can be easily read. Needless Street. Dee understands for the first time why people faint and how it happens. It is like a white light going off in her brain, a flash followed by a dark shock. She now knows where the suspect lived, maybe even still lives. She breathes, shallow and fast. That would be enough. But it is not only that. Okay, now you've got the present tense narrative, and as you can see, it's all about Dee and her immediate feelings, her sensations, her thoughts. This in the whole book is the general narrative tense that's used, and it gives it a particularly edgy, immediate kind of perspective. It's in the third person, so you're not quite there in the first person. It's not as extreme close-up as if it were, let's say, the first person point of view and the present tense, which would make it very, very immediate indeed, and possibly a bit much for your readers, but it's getting there. Thrillers are often written like this because it gives you that sense of, this is not a story in the past, this is a story unfolding right now in front of your eyes. Anything could happen. It goes on. "We were there that day," Dee whispers. "Dad took a wrong turn." Her mouth fills with the taste of memory and bubblegum. She must have chewed 30 pieces on that long-ago ride. Dad was driving to the lake, but he missed an exit and they ended up wandering, lost, through the endless grey suburbs that hemmed the forest. Now you can see that the writer has dipped nicely into the past here. She is using the perfect narrative tense. She's also using the imperfect because there's a lot of description. She has slid from her immediate present tense narrative into a memory, which is going to feed into her character, which is going to feed into the plot. But she's done it quite neatly so that it doesn't sound awkward, which is something you want to avoid. Then the rows of one-stories thinned out and gave way to peeling Victorian houses, and the rank wild scent of the woods grew strong. These were streets that went nowhere. She recalls driving past that sign and thinking, yes, this crap hole is totally needless. The street was a dead end, she remembers now. Dad wiped his brow and swore under his breath, and they turned around and retraced their steps. Okay, well, it keeps dipping back into the present now. Why? It's because the author doesn't want to take you into the past too long before reminding you that something is still unfolding. So she's still remembering. Her memory is still in the past, but from time to time there is a little present tense reminder that you're still there on the edge of your seat, waiting to see what's happening to Dee in real time. And this is a good example of how you can just keep going back into your preferred narrative tense while using another one for effect, but not staying there too long, because to stay there too long would be to lose the thread of the narrative you're telling. They found Highway 101 again soon after, and the name of the street receded into the depths of Dee's mind, to be shelved with other useless information: what colour the attendant's uniform had been when they stopped for gas, who liked her best at school, who played bass in that band. Right, she's taken it further out, she's gone into the pluperfect now. Had. What colour the attendant's uniform had been. You can see this mental camera moving out a little, and even further, taking the memory further into the past, preparing you for the next slice of present tense narrative. For a moment, Dee considers whether this could be a coincidence, but she rejects this idea with a strong mental shove. It must be connected somehow. It must. And with that connection, you, the reader, you're connected back again to the present, to the narrative tense she's using. It's done very deftly. If you were reading this book just as a reader rather than as a writer, you probably wouldn't notice all the shifts of tense that have happened in just that one little passage, but it happens, and so the effect that you get, without really quite realizing it, is you are in the character's head, then you're in her memory, then you're reminded that you're still in her head and waiting for something to happen. The memory unfolds, the memory goes slightly more distant, melts away, you're back in the present again, waiting for the next development. It's nicely done. You should study this kind of thing, really, because it's very, very easy to get these tense management things wrong. It's very easy to write too much in the pluperfect, and that pluperfect tense, that it had happened, he had said this, is a very slow, very turgid tense. It's not very immediate at all. It tends to be quite dull. There's not much suspense in the pluperfect tense because it's not even just in the past. It's in the distant, remote past. So if you want a sense of immediacy, it is better to avoid it, except when you absolutely need to use it, and then only to dip into it slightly. I've just read a proof that I had to bin because there was a whole chapter that was there in the pluperfect tense, and it sounded very clumsy and very slow. Not everybody wants to write in the present tense all the time. Some people don't like it. Some people prefer just to dip into it once in a while. I do this quite a lot. I will write something that is properly in the past tense most of the time, using the perfect tense as a narrative, using the imperfect tense, it was raining, it was sunny, the sky was blue, as kind of visual, descriptive padding, but returning to the perfect tense as the narrative tense. And then from time to time, when something gets very exciting or when something gets very immediate, I will pop into the present tense for just a paragraph or just a few lines, and then go back into the past tense. I like to do this because, to me, it's a variation of the camera angles, but it's also to emphasize a moment a feeling, a sensation. Not everybody does this. I happen to like it. It happens to work for me, but you may not decide to do that at all. You may prefer to determine whether your narrative is in the present or in the past and just deal with that. If you want to go full extreme close-up, then you will do what's done in these books, and I wouldn't advise it because it is a very particular style, but you would use the second person and the present tense, and that is the closest perspective you can get. These DIY adventures are designed to bring you directly into the narrative, to break the fourth wall and actually pull the reader in through it, to place them in the story. This is a very particular kind of writing. It's, again, not for everybody, and it's not for every kind of literature, but this is how it works. Ahead, you see a wooden bridge stretching over a dirty river. Various bits of rubbish are floating down to the sea on its black surface, and you squirm at the sight of a human hand passing by. The bridge supports and columns reach high above you, and you see skulls, both human and non-human, tied to them. Okay, well, this is absolutely designed for this purpose, to drag you into the story, to make your story immediate, to sit you on the edge of the seat, not on behalf of a character in a book, but on behalf of yourself, playing the role of the character in the book. I wouldn't necessarily advise you using this, but it's how it works, it's why it works, it's why this particular series of books have been so very, very popular. Next time I'll be talking about something else. Join me then. Until then, happy reading and goodbye.